Hey, so I've tried to make this video several times, especially several times yesterday, and it didn't exactly go so well. Um, this is supposed to be a video about, you know, appreciating nature from the believer's perspective, from the theist's perspective, which can be hard for me to completely conceptualize and then translate it into words because I personally don't share that belief, and so that idea for me doesn't come as easy, or because like from the perspective of like a person who believes in a higher power, in a god, in a deity, they that idea is fully realized within their own mind, if that makes any sense. For them it's a no-brainer, but for me it's like I don't have that. I can almost conceive of it. I can almost um, hold that concept within my own mind, but since I don't believe it exists, since I believe that it comes with certain like inherent sort of logical inconsistencies, or just problems where the thing itself runs into sort of paradoxes and contradictions within itself, it's hard for me to fully accept it as a workable idea, I guess you could say. But this video is supposed to be about the appreciation of nature from the theistic perspective, and how I, as a non-believer, could possibly, um, conceive of it. So, having already stated like my own difficulty with conceiving of it, or sort of holding that idea in my mind, I'm going to try my best. And for me, what I notice is that, I mean, if you look at ancient religions, or even religions which, have existed since ancient times but are still around, usually, like, their ideas of gods will be born out of, regular occurrences in nature, or forces of nature, or abstract concepts, if you think about it in terms of like Hinduism or Zoroastrianism, which is a long dead religion, I would imagine. Um, but you think about it in terms of like ancient Egypt and the Norse gods, um, or even like if you go deep enough into mythology on angels and seraphim. You have the angel of death, you have the angel of um, of tribulation and trial. I think there seems to be sort of this common theme of deities or deities being sort of connected to abstract concepts or forces of nature that are beyond our control, and we being um, these pattern recognizing but also um, agent um, recognizing beings, us as humans, we attribute these what would otherwise be forces of nature or just inherent parts of reality to these thinking, conscious, and I guess you could call them very deliberate acts by, conscious beings. So we attribute, just happenings in the universe to, or happenings in our world and on Earth to these um, all-powerful, or at least very powerful um, beings. Like I think about like the Hindu god of the storm, Indra, or the angel of death, the Hindu god of destruction and dance, Shiva, Brahma, the preserver, Vishnu, the creator. You or you have God in the Christian theology, who is the creator of all things, the entire universe in many Christians, beliefs. And not only is the Christian God an a panacea, an explainer for the very existence of the universe and all of its intricacies, but also provides like kind of hope and comfort as like the primary being of light and joy and love, which are, I mean, I don't deny that those are all very comforting and heartwarming and good feeling ideas, for all those to be exemplified in one perfect being. But as you could already imagine, I don't really see a good reason to believe that such a being actually exists, so it just exists as an idea that many people, believe to be absolutely true. And then you think about it in terms of like, like I in the previous versions of this video, I kept thinking about it in terms of, ancient peoples looking up into the night sky, or seeing how, let's say, like the Nile River for the Egyptians would overflow its banks and allow for effective farming of crops in otherwise arid desert, and how they attribute that to the supernatural. Or they'll look up and see these bright points of light in the sky, these stars, and attribute them to celestial beings who exist on a higher plane than ourselves. I mean, even in the Christian religion, you have these older ideas of the stars being pinpoints of light, which are, sort of scattered throughout this firmament that exists, in ever layered shells above us or around us, with us on Earth in the middle of this sort of layered firmament universe. I don't know how to say that in the most non-clunky way, but you have these sort of concepts of the world around us from a theistic perspective, in which they view all of nature's happenings and all of life's, occurrences, all of the universe's many wondrous images that you see just by looking up at the night sky, and they attribute it to, supernatural forces, these supernatural beings. And so, like, for the creationists, everything is a representation of, God's intelligent design, God's love for humanity, God's intellect, His planning. From the Christian perspective, everything has a purpose, everything has His divine essence imbued into those objects. Because if you're a Christian and you believe that He created the universe and that He's all loving and He has all of these other attributes, then naturally you would assume that by looking at a tree, you're looking at not only proof of the divine, but also sort of the gift of the divine, in a sort of circle. But the Christian idea of nature and God isn't exactly the universal idea of nature and God. I like to refer to it because it's the one that I'm most familiar with as a person who lives in the United States and is surrounded by Christians, or really in the Western Hemisphere generally. I mean, yeah, the Western Hemisphere generally, the Abrahamic religions sort of dominate here. I mean, they dominate in the West and Europe as well, but, you do also have Eastern religions in which there's not this clear concept of this God which not only creates the universe, but naturally wants the best for its creations, us, and sort of designs the universe to do so, and puts us through tests as the Christian God would. Or I think this even applies to like the Islamic and Jewish ideas of the Abrahamic God, but I don't know if you necessarily have that in like Hinduism or Taoism, Buddhism, um, um, or various other polytheistic beliefs, or sort of pseudo-religious beliefs in the case of maybe Buddhism, depending on your view of it. And so I do sort of recurringly think back to the ancient man looking up at the stars with the same appreciation for its beauty and immensity and its majesty. All the flowery language that I would use to describe it, awe-inspiring. And I imagine a human being in ancient times, or even a person who's a religious believer today, looking up at that and saying, "Wow, look at God's handiwork," or "Look at the handiwork of these divine beings." If you're thinking about it in terms of like an ancient Egyptian, for example, or ancient Sumerian, um, or just the mountains, these huge rock formations which dwarf us just so obviously. Um, the storms, the powerful winds, earthquakes, all of these natural occurrences and things which dwarf us by just so much, or that leave us in awe. And if you're religiously minded, then you see all of this and you attribute it to a divine being, and that for you contributes to your sense of awe in these items, in these things, because they are your way of connecting to the divine being which you believe in, which I can understand. I can understand why that sentiment is so important to a religious believer. All natural things are in some way linked to the divine. And while I don't hold this belief myself, I don't hold this particular idea myself, I can understand why other people do have this sort of feeling when they see the immensity and the beauty of the universe, or of hell, or just the earth itself and all of its natural settings. The changing of the trees, the what I've mentioned before, rainbows, thunder, lightning, all of these really amazing processes and natural occurrences which leave us in awe of them. You know, Thor comes to mind when I think about lightning and thunder. The Nordic beliefs, the beliefs of the Vikings and other Nordic peoples, of Thor being the one who throws down the lightning and causes the thunder, or you go back to the Greeks, Zeus, who throws down lightning bolts. They attributed to this thinking being. They anthropomorphize these natural processes, because as human beings, it's something we do naturally. So, given our lack of knowledge of like the true workings of nature and the universe, then I can't really fault ancient peoples for believing those things, because they had a great working knowledge of, you know, building, of creating, writing. But there were things which, because of their limitations in being able to observe or test, there are just certain things that ancient peoples didn't know, and so created whole theologies around them, around these ideas to try to explain the universe and the earth that we live on, but also try to make it a more palatable place for us to exist. There are harsh realities that I accept as a non-believer, but that I imagine to someone else who is more inclined to believe in a divine being, that they wouldn't want to accept. Like in my past videos about sort of the impermanence of all things, including human beings, but even like the earth, maybe even the universe. That's to a Christian, for example, that's unacceptable. But to a person like me, it's just part of sort of accepting what your existence is on a fundamental level, or how it works. But yeah, it's like I think back to like Ralph Waldo Emerson's book on nature, which I love. His appreciation of natural beauty, um, the sheer poetry that he uses in order to describe it, it's it's amazing to read. It's admirable. Where we differ is how we interpret it or why we're appreciating nature. I appreciate nature for what it is, whereas Ralph Waldo Emerson appreciates it so that he can feel closer to his God. Um, we've divergent views, but we're both appreciating the same thing just for different reasons. While I can really commend him on his wanting to appreciate nature. Um, where I disagree with him is just in terms of like deeper metaphysical truths that a sunset, the sun, the stars, everything, all of nature really points to, if that makes sense. Because it's just, I guess it's really interesting to me, that sort of difference where I'll look at a sunset and I'll believe it to be, absolutely beautiful. Um, but a believer will see it and find it beautiful because of the divine being which they hold to be the very center of everything for them. So it's like for me, a sunset is this beautiful, fleeting occurrence. Happens every day, but it's only for just a little bit of time, and you don't always get to see it. Just appreciation for the beauty which occurs when this very natural setting of the sun occurs at the end of each day, or of a sunrise, the reverse. But for a Christian, it is the glory of God that they're witnessing. They are, they're not just bathed in sunlight; they're bathed in the glory of the divine. Um, I guess for me, I have the divine right there with me. Um, Not in a sort of supernatural, deep metaphysical sense, where I believe that the universe is itself a divine thing, like maybe Einstein may have believed, but it's as close to what one would consider the divine as a person like me can get. Which isn't to knock it. It's not to knock it in any way. It's like that same sort of awe and admiration and sense of pure joy, pure peace that you feel as a Christian when you see the things you believe to be God's handiwork. You know, I feel those I have those same feelings, just not for the same reason. I appreciate nature for what it is, and considering that it is all there is, but that's not to say that it's small. It's immense. Um, it's just that is what we have to work with. It's what we have to appreciate. But again, it's for a person who believes, for a person who's atheist, it's different. It's just like a different way of looking at things, I guess. Um, you have the pyramids in Egypt, which are built to almost exactly point to 3 stars in the night sky. Um, and they're built so that these pharaohs will have, you know, a proper sort of gateway to the afterlife, um, to which they connect, the night sky. Um, a lot of what the Egyptians did was with the constellations and the night sky in mind when they thought about the afterlife and how to prepare for the afterlife. And this will probably get me into like another video that I want to do in the future about astrology and sort of the new age beliefs. But I know I see them doing that, and I see where they have this appreciation for the natural world, They do at some fundamental level, but it's also imbued with these supernatural and theistic beliefs. So it's like we're so close, and yet there's that one step where we disconnect. Um, and this whole video I've been rambling on for 20 minutes plus, and I guess it's just trying to sort of bridge that gap that I'm trying to conceive of how to do that. But it's hard because, you know, we see the world in two fundamentally different ways, but we end up appreciating and loving and, you know, looking at the world in similar ways. And it's similar to how we come to some of the same moral conclusions, yet believing there to be a completely different sort of moral framework or sort of metaphysical basis behind our moral conclusions. So I guess I mean it in sort of that way. We both appreciate nature, but for entirely different reasons when you get to like the deep metaphysical truths which we each believe in. And so in terms of the conceiving of the divine itself, I feel like for me, you know, conceiving of a being which exists outside of time is, I mean, it's hard to imagine, but also like exists outside of time and space, is, you know, a perfect being when you consider all of these different parameters. I think this will be a concept for me to discuss probably in a future video, just like conceiving of the divine in terms of what it is, as opposed to this video, which will be more about, or has been more about, you know, the divine in how the supernatural and divine can be found or interpreted to exist in the natural world, or to interact with the natural world, or create the natural world. Simply like the interactions up to and including the creation of nature, of the natural world. That sort of relationship is for me a separate thing in terms of like just purely conceptually. It's separate from the divine being itself to an extent, because, you know, we can talk for forever about whether or not this or the other natural occurrence or sort of fact about the universe or about nature really points to a divine being, but there's also the idea or the discussion to be had as to what that divine being actually is, which is, you know, a debate and discussion which has been going on in theology for ages, since the very conception of divine beings, of, you know, supernatural existence, the afterlife, of gods, of deities. So I think in this series of videos on the divine, this will be the video which talks more about the divine in nature, and then the second one will be the talking about the divine but sort of isolated unto itself and what exactly it is. Because, you know, it's one thing to use it as an explanation for this, that, and the other thing, or to use it as like a sort of a comforting entity in what would otherwise be a cold and unfeeling universe. But then there's also the idea of that being itself. Like, what is it? How does it work? How does it exist? You know, all of those questions which, you know, I've always had. I guess in the following video, I'm going to be focusing more on that, just like, what is the divine? Exactly. So this will be a bit of a... Hopefully every video is a little different from the last. Although I realize that maybe this video didn't really get anywhere, but it's more of a, I guess, discussion starter than anything else, as quite a few of these videos might be in their own way. So I'm going to stop it here before it gets any longer, and goodbye.